Welcome to the next edition of Pizz-Spectives. My name is Rob Pizzichetta, founder of Mont Wealth, and today we want to talk a little bit about the 2025 Superannuation Guide, but also following a Grattan Institute paper and a recommendation to the government, could the federal government look to superannuation to fund future deficits? Now, as an advisor, we need to be futurists. We need to anticipate the goalposts potentially shifting, so we'll talk a little bit about that over the next 10 or 15 minutes. Now, before we start, the general advice disclaimer: any information presented is of general nature only and has been prepared without considering your relevant personal circumstances. Those acting upon information without first consulting a financial advisor do so entirely at their risk. So let's get on with it. So recently, Mont Wealth celebrated our 3-year anniversary since inception. And over that time, we've established a 4-person investment committee, created 2 model portfolios to recommend to investors. Firstly, strategic growth, which is targeted for wealth accumulators, and an income model portfolio targeting conservative and income investors. Now, we currently advise around about 46 to 50 families targeting their wealth goals with capacity for 120 family groups. And we've generated top quartile performance for both strategic growth and income. We've also launched the YouTube and Apple and Spotify podcasts. And please highly recommend it to your friends and family. The podcast, much appreciated. But it's not just about performance, it's also about service. Over that time, some examples about strategic and planning recommendations is working with the client's tax accountant. We've advised to wait until retirement to sell investment properties within SMSF, saving hundreds of thousands in tax liabilities. We've reviewed insurance policies, saving tens of thousands of premiums per annum. We've recommended a couple salary sacrifice their super rather than investing in non-super, improving their after-tax yearly income by about $2,500 each. We've also advised on carry forward contributions, which combined has reduced taxable income by circa $53,000 for a couple. And we've also successfully advised on downsizer contributions. But before we get onto the strategies and super guide, talk a little bit about the financial advice landscape. Now, the Financial Advice Association of Australia, FAAA, conducted a survey in 2024, and they found that 93% of participants acknowledge that their advisor has helped them manage financial risks. 90% have advised that clients believe the benefits of financial advice outweigh the costs, and 80% report being less worried about money since receiving advice. So all in all, positive outcomes for financial advice and the underlying customer. Now, we think about financial advice in the landscape. There are currently 16 million Australians over the age of 30. There are 15,575 financial advisors. Now, every advisor advised every Australian over the age of 30. Each advisor would advise 1,040 clients each. The reality is, each advisor can only advise 120 to 150 clients. Therefore, only 12 to 15% of Australians ever receive strategic financial advice. So having a look at the Superannuation Guide for 2025, we do know that the Superannuation Guarantee, which they call the concessional contribution, will increase to 12% of your salary in July 2025 and legislated to remain thereafter. Now, the maximum concessional contributions remain at $30,000 per annum. The non-concessional contributions, so you've already paid tax on these monies that you want to put additionally into super, you can contribute $120,000 per year after tax, but you can use the bring forward rule, which you can have 3 times the $120,000 up to $360,000, and you need to be under the age of 75. And caps also apply based on super balances, need to be below $2 million on the 1st of July 2025. Now, for those superannuants that have got less than $500,000 in super and haven't maximized their concessional contribution, you can utilize the carry forward rule, which means over the last 5 years, whatever the difference is between the maximum amount, whether it's 30,000, 27 or 25,000, you're actually able to play catch up, contribute those monies into super and claim a portion of that in your tax return at your marginal tax rate, which does benefit and accelerate your retirement targeting and strategy. There's also the downsizer contribution. To qualify for that, you need to be over the age of 55. You have to have owned your home for more than 10 years, and you need to contribute within 90 days of settlement. You're allowed up to $300,000 from the sale of your home per spouse. Now, once you get to retirement, there's a balance called the transfer balance cap. Now, TBC, transfer balance cap, is a limit on the total amount of superannuation that can be transferred into retirement phase. The ATO has just increased the TBC amount from $1.9 million to $2 million from the 1st of July 2025. You can make transfers into retirement phase as long as you remain below the TBC. Now, an example of that, you've got $2 million in your account-based pension and you've got $1 million in the accumulation phase still. If you've then taken maybe $100,000 out of your retirement or account-based pension and it reduces to $1.9 million, you can use $100,000 from the $3 million and top up the transfer balance cap. That becomes a tax-free income generator. Now, also just be aware, there's minimum percentages that you have to take out of retirement in your account-based pension balance account. And under the age of 65, it's 4%, 65 to 75, it's 5%, and it's tiered all the way through to 95 and more. And when you get to 95, you need to take up a minimum of 14% of your super. Now, we'll talk a little bit about exactly why the government is forcing people to take more and more money out of super as they get older. Now, the Grattan Institute has just released what they call the Orange Book for 2025. It's policy priorities for the federal government. Now, we're going to speak specifically about retirement incomes, and this has just been released and advised to the government, and we'll talk about that, and we'll put the link to the document in the notes for you to refer to. Now, firstly, the Grattan Institute challenges and recommendations. Now, more than half of single retirees who rent in private market live in poverty, and falling home ownership means the problem will only get worse. The cost of superannuation tax concessions is too high, totaling $52 billion a year, and will soon exceed the cost of the age pension. 2/3 of the benefit flow to the wealthiest 20% of households. Now, let me repeat that. 2/3 of the benefit of the superannuation tax concessions flow to the wealthiest 20% of households. Few retirees draw down their retirement savings, turning superannuation into a massive inheritance scheme. Now, recall what I noted earlier, as you get over the age of 95, you need to draw down a minimum of 14% of your retirement balance for this very reason. They don't want it to be an inheritance scheme. We do not have death taxes here yet in Australia, but that doesn't rule out the chance that might come in at some stage. More than 2 in 3 retirees who rent privately live in poverty, including more than 3 in 4 single women. Now, this also highlights the importance of home ownership and why it is very important to get younger Australians into the housing market, because you do not want them to have a higher risk of poverty as they go into retirement, as they are lifelong renters. Now, more than half of retirees who rent have less than $25,000 in savings. Australians are retiring with mortgage debt. About 13% of over 65s had a mortgage in 2019 to 2020. Now, unless Australians are willing to draw on their home equity in retirement, Australians will be left with lower living standards. Now, going back to the point earlier about the downsizer contribution, depending on circumstances, we do highly recommend using the downsizer contribution to help fund retirement and being self-sufficient in retirement. Now, as I noted earlier, the superannuation tax breaks cost more than $50 billion a year. Now, that's nearly 2% of GDP. And by 2062, the tax breaks will account for about 2.5% of GDP. Australians spend more on superannuation fees, around $30 billion a year, than energy bills. Poor market design, a lack of competition, and we will add excessive compliance costs are part of the reason. Now, Australians today are retiring with more than 200,000 in super on average. By the early 2040s, the average will be 250,000, and by 2060s, 500,000. Now, ideally, we are targeting a much higher balance of that in superannuation, and using those superannuation strategies as well as performance can help us get much higher than that level. Happy to talk to you about how we can achieve that. Now, the Grattan Institute has recommended to the government that curbing super tax breaks should be a priority. Grattan recommends, now this is the concerning recommendations for superannuants to be aware of. Grattan recommends lowering the additional 15% tax on super balances from $3 million to $2 million. They advise to increase the Division 293 tax from 30% to 35%. Now, what's the Division 293? Now, recall earlier, the maximum concessional contribution you can make into super is $30,000. Now, assuming you earn $300,000 at 12%, that equates to roughly $36,000 a year of concessional contributions into super. They are recommending that rather than being taxed 30% of $6,000, you should be taxed 35% of $6,000. And if you lower the income tax threshold from $250,000 to $220,000, This will save the budget $1.1 billion per year. They also advise that lower the pre-tax super contributions from $30,000 to $20,000, saving the $1.6 billion a year. They suggest abolish the carry forward provisions and government co-contributions, saving $1.1 billion a year. So this goes back to what and how the structure is at the moment and how they're recommending the change. Now, I highly recommend to anyone listening on government and also SMSF and financial advice and superannuation industries that continually moving the goalposts on how we can retire and be self-funded shouldn't be moved. It should stay grandfathered to a certain level, and that way it encourages people to use the system without actually changing it. They also advise that the tax all earnings in retirement at 15%. Now, recall earlier the first $2 million in retirement is tax-free. Now, they're recommending that we tax that at 15%. This would save more than $5.3 billion a year for the government. Collectively, all of these savings would support government funding by circa $10 billion per year. The government should also include more home equity in the age pension test, currently only $252,000. Now, almost 40% of the government spending goes to people with more than $750,000 in assets. This would encourage retirees to downsize and draw on equity created in their home. And I highly encourage this. I think it's a great idea. This could save the government and budget $4 billion a year. So what does this actually all mean? It means that we should consider looking forward, the demographic changes, the deficits of the government, how we should be considering how we structure our vehicles for retirement, and whether that's personal name, trusts, companies, or even your SMSF or retail super funds. We shouldn't put all of our eggs in one basket. Plan ahead. That way we are well covered and diversified across any risks of government changing their mind on how they want to tax superannuation to reduce the deficit in future years. My name is Rob Pizzichetta. I can be contacted at rob@montwealth.com.au or on the website montwealth.com.au. Thanks very much for your time.